Hello, Shadwell here, ready to talk about the next film in my collection, The Haunted World of Edward D. Wood Jr. from 1995. It's directed by Brett Thompson and stars Dolores Fuller and Paul Marco. This is my first time seeing this documentary, which is at the tail end of the Ed Wood box. It came out in 1995, which, for anyone paying attention, is the year after Tim Burton's Ed Wood film released. I smell something fishy. I get the feeling this documentary was a strike while the iron is hot sort of thing, as there are several parts where they respond directly to a scene or a story from Tim Burton's Ed Wood film. Like when the producer of Plan 9 from Outer Space recalls that it wasn't him and the other producers that changed the title of the film from the original Grave Robbers from Outer Space, and how he thought the assumption was preposterous. There was some stuff that was very offensive, of course, that had to deal with Edward D. Wood Jr.'s desire to sometimes dress in women's clothes. Several of those interviewed were a little too earnest to convince us of how straight Edward D. Wood Jr. was, including one guy whose name escapes me right now, says he had to be straight because he fought bravely in the war. There was also another interviewee that had a very negative reaction to Edward D. Wood Jr. and women's clothing in front of him and the hatred with which the man tinges his words to make him look like an elderly asshole. They did get an interview with Edward D. Wood Jr.'s first of two wives, who was completely written out of Tim Burton's film, probably because she had an even more adverse reaction to Edward D. Wood Jr.'s wearing of women's clothing than Dolores did, and Tim Burton could only stand showing us one such scene instead of two. Also, I find it hilarious that Mila Nurmi, better known as Vampira, may as well be on a different biography because she is more concerned with talking about herself, and to a much smaller extent Criswell, than she talks about Edward D. Wood Jr. This biography is not really good. It's a collection of people who knew Edward D. Wood Jr., but there's no real tether to these people. They all paint a very different picture of him, and at the end of the day, it's just people sitting down and telling stories about Edward D. Wood Jr. and whatever the hell Mila Nurmi was doing. And although there is some merit to such a collection, it's minimal when you can't find a through line in it to unite everything. The only thing they could all agree on was that Edward D. Wood Jr. was a troubled, flawed individual, which makes him like any of us, and in the end, not really all that special as it turns out. I'm going to give The Haunted World of Edward D. Wood Jr. a C- because it wasn't great, but the stories were interesting enough on their own. Tomorrow I watch Eight-Legged Freaks. See y'all then.